When you think of Mazda, it's very easy to get caught up in some of their luxury offerings, even when it comes to cars like this compact CX-30. However, Burmaz has decided that Malaysian buyers deserve more options, and so we have this, the Mazda CX-30 Core, where it only retains the most core features and specifications that make this car great, according to them. And we're going to find out whether or not that's true. And if you'd like to follow on, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Now, because this is the core, like I mentioned earlier, you have to only have the core specifications on this car in order to keep the price down. And one of the core attributes of any Mazda is its design. And the CX-30 Core is no different, where you still have this very sharp front end, where the most protruding part of this nose is actually this bit here and this bit here, making it look very bold indeed. That enormous grille framed with this single piece of chrome, at least they want you to think a single piece is actually joined in the middle, are flanked by a couple of very thin, very small LED projector headlights. Now, the headlights themselves are projectors. Unfortunately, the daytime running lights are little bulbs up here in the corner, and those are halogen. These are one of the things that the Core loses over the other variants. It also doesn't come with fog lights, although no CX-30 does, although you do get LED positioning lights down here and LED indicators, which have a unique lighting signature to them, whereas you can see they blink in a very unique fashion and they light up as the positioning lights, as you can see here. Now, the thing about the Core is, if you look at it from the outside, there are very few things to tell you that this is the base of the CX-30 range. It doesn't matter if you get the Core 1.5 or this, which is the Core 2.0 with a bigger engine, obviously. The exterior specifications are exactly the same. The Core models run on 16-inch alloy wheels. They get the slightly downturned headlights I mentioned earlier, and everything else is exactly the same, including the very prominent body cladding. Now, although Mazda has cheapened out on the headlights on this car, somehow the tail lights are still exactly the same. So these are full LED units with the indicator integrated into there with a very nice light signature, which I think is rather nice. You don't get this on the Mazda 3 hatch or sedan 1.5s. They swap those out for slightly cheaper tail lights. And like I said, you still get the very prominent black body cladding all around the body, and this is a standard feature across the range. It's nothing to do with the fact this is the base model. Now, in terms of weird specification options, you'd think that this being the base model, they would cheap out in one other area, but they didn't. That was my fault. It has a powered tailgate. This car has no parking sensors, front or rear, but it has a powered tailgate. Okay? Now, once the tailgate is open, this is the same amount of cargo space that you get in a regular CX-30, which means there is plenty of room for 5 people's worth of crap. And of course, if you need more space, there is a little bit of room underneath the boot floor, which is very difficult to access because of this coil mat. But once I do eventually get it out of the way, you will see that there is a space saver spare wheel plus a little bit more space for you to put things like the toolkit and so on, which means that they don't have to clutter up the space in here. Although that said, there is still an emergency first aid kit in the back of this car. I suspect it's just because this car has been doing duty as a marketing and sales car, which means stuff gets moved around a lot. Now, overall, if you ask me about the exterior specifications, I think that Mazda did get some things right and some things wrong. Now, while I understand why the lights had to be made a little bit more affordable in order to hit the price point that this car has, I must say that the halogen daytime running lights do make the car look a little bit cheap, and I find it a bit weird since there are LED strips on the bumper that could have been used as daytime running lights instead. What I do like, however, are the small wheels. Yes, 16-inch wheels on this car do look a little bit odd, and there is quite a lot of sidewall and they do look small, but it does mean that 1, the tires themselves are cheaper, and 2, you can hit potholes without concern. The second one is a big deal for me because I live in PJ. And because I live in PJ, it does mean that I also like to be isolated from the outside world, and the CX-30 does a very good job of that. Now, if I put away my sunglasses in this sunglasses holder, which is something that surprisingly few vehicles come with these days, exploring this interior reveals that again they've been very smart with the specifications. Yes, this is cloth upholstery and both of these front seats are manual. But in terms of material quality in here, everything is fantastic. This dash front, for example, is very soft. The dash top is a stitched blue leather, which I find very interesting. And contrasting to the rest of this interior, I kind of like the fact that the blue breaks up the monotony. You also get some piano black down here, and although your eyes may see this as white, it's actually black. No, it's just the protective film because Burmaz likes to leave this on their cars. You also lose out on the wireless charger here, but it's still a very nice shelf for you to put your phone. And if you use Android Auto, the USB port is here anyway. It makes for a nice place to rest your phone, so I think that that's not too bad. The other two areas where they haven't cheaped out is in terms of technology. So the central screen here and the digital or semi-digital instrument cluster remain unchanged from the rest of the range. So you still get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto here. You still get digital instrumentation in the center of the dials here, which means that you can get all sorts of information that you need. And you even get a full color heads-up display, which is among the best in the industry in terms of graphics and responsiveness, which I quite like. You've lost climate control, however, so it's a bit strange that you have a regular air conditioning system down here instead of climate control, but that's something you'll get used to very quickly. And overall, I really don't think that this car feels like the cheap model within the range. Mazda has done this for a while though, even though their cars are relatively affordable, at least compared to premium vehicles or even semi-premium vehicles. Volkswagen. The interior build quality of these cars tend to be fantastic, and that continues to this core model. The only thing that's cheapening the experience is the fact that we now still have coil mats in here. Carpets, please Mazda, please. And while the back still has coil mats, at least everything else in here is not too bad. These seats are quite excellent because I have a good angle here, so I can actually keep my feet like this if I should so want to, and even if I stretch out, I do get very good under thigh support. The third seat right here in the middle is not so great because the floor is a bit raised, because you can get the CX-30 as an all-wheel drive model, even in our market, and so in order to make room for the mechanical gubbins underneath, there is quite a prominent tunnel here. The other irritating thing is this car doesn't come with rear aircon vents or a USB port, not even one. Which means if you do have children mounted in the ISOFIX child seats back here, they won't be able to keep their devices charged up. And if you have adults, well, then they'll just have to share the USB port that's all the way over there. That said though, if you do want to use this as a family car, you will appreciate the fact that the doors do open a decent amount, but very large car seats may struggle. The ISOFIX mounts themselves are very easy to locate, although the covers come off like this, which means I give it about 10 minutes before you lose them. And these cars come as standard with tint, which means that if you have young children who may be UV light sensitive, at least this car will go some way in protecting them. Overall, I do think there are larger crossovers within this price range especially, but I think that if you're looking for quality and dynamics and so on in a car, the Mazda CX-30 is pretty hard to beat, especially at this price point. Now, the thing about a Mazda, like I mentioned earlier, is that half the reason you buy one of these is for the way it drives. And so, without further ado, now the thing about driving the 2-litre core CX-30 is that it just feels like a regular CX-30. Because under the bonnet, you will find a 2-litre 4-cylinder petrol engine mated to a 6-speed automatic gearbox, sending power to the front wheels. This is a recipe that is very familiar to CX-30 buyers already. And so, from a driver's perspective, nothing's really changed. On top of that, I still get the same leather-wrapped steering wheel, the same heads-up display and so on like I explained earlier, and so it just feels like a regular CX-30, nothing really remarkable about it. And that is perhaps one of this car's strongest suits, even though it is markedly cheaper than some of its competitors, and more importantly, it sits on the lower end of the CX-30 range itself. It still offers all of the qualities that we love about the CX-30, the way it drives, its level of refinement, its poise, and its comfort. So talking about the drive, I'd like to first touch on refinement. So the Mazda CX-30 has always sat a little bit like a cut above its competitors, and it continues with the CX-30 core. The engine feels very far away and it is quite muted until you really wring its neck, which is certainly very appreciated in a car like this. and the 6-speed automatic box does an excellent job of shifting gears seamlessly and smoothly, and it moves very quickly when you absolutely need it to, which is very nice to have. That certainly feels very much Mazda. In fact, even though this car rides on much smaller 16-inch alloy wheels, which may not suggest, say, the best driving performance out there, through the corners, these tires and the tire and wheel combo do a very good job of maintaining grip and communicating quite a bit back to the driver, which I appreciate because this is ultimately a Mazda. And most Mazda buyers look at this car for the fact that it drives very well, and so that certainly hasn't been compromised. The one area where I feel like this car could be vastly improved upon is not the interior accoutrements, because I think they're fine. I think the Android Auto works just well, and everything in here is pretty much okay. There isn't really anything in here that would stop me from buying this car, except for safety. Because you see, where this car has all of the core features of a CX-30, somehow Mazda's decided that the core of the CX-30 has nothing to do with safety. And so this car doesn't come with blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, AEB, not even parking sensors. Instead, this car just comes with a reverse camera, and that's it. And in that sense, I do feel like this car may make you feel a little bit shortchanged because there's nothing in here. And to that end, if I were to ferry a family in a car like this, if I had a family to ferry around, I would certainly want there to be more in the way of active safety, at the very least AEB and blind spot monitoring, if nothing else. The lack of parking sensors to me also just feels a little cheap. Not that I've really needed them driving this car around because the visibility is pretty much all right, but it's just that not having them in something that's been standard on cars since the late 1980s, early 1990s just feels a bit cheap and doesn't really feel nice. What does feel nice, however, is the ride, because thanks to those tiny alloy wheels and thick, squishy tires, it means that I can go over even paved surfaces like that roundabout and I don't feel a thing, and I do quite like that. The last thing about this car that I really like is actually the fuel consumption. So even though this is a 2-litre naturally aspirated engine, which may not suggest power or economy for that matter, this car has a decent amount of performance, and more importantly, it's got decent economy. So after having driven this car about 400 kilometers, the trip computer is now telling us that we have done about 11.5 kilometers per litre, which works out to about 8.5 litres per 100 kilometers if my math isn't bad, which it is. And if I'm wrong, please put it in the comments. And as far as I'm concerned, 11.2 to 11.5 kilometers per litre seems just fine to me. This is a pretty good car. It's efficient, it's punchy enough, it's powerful enough. I mean, what else would you want? And the most amazing part about this is, weirdly, the fuel economy actually got better when I drove it in traffic, which means maybe I drive a bit too fast on motorways. Make of that what you will. But what's very clear is that the CX-30 Core, although this is ultimately the cut price affordable CX-30, it certainly doesn't feel cut price in any way. This arguably is the value proposition in the lineup when you want something that's comfortable and refined and very good to drive and good on fuel and ultimately very reliable, but you don't necessarily want or need the luxuries of leather electric seats and all sorts of other gubbins. This is good enough. And sure, if you had 140-odd thousand ringgit to spend, there are plenty of other competitors. Honda's HR-V has recently been refreshed and reloaded for our market, and so that certainly will turn a bit more heads at the moment compared to this car, perhaps. And of course, if you want the ultimate space competitor, you might end up looking at the Toyota Corolla Cross, especially in hybrid guise, which is even more fuel efficient than this, especially when you're driving around in town. But ultimately, if you're looking for a car that feels premium without costing you a pretty penny, then this is very well the car you ought to be looking at. It's so impressive. And even though I've generally liked the CX-30, I came into this not expecting much, but I found myself pleasantly surprised. And I certainly love the foot that this car has put forward. And I would recommend this to even the most penny pinching types out there. In any case, that's been our review of the 2022 Mazda CX-30 Core 2-litre. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe and jangan bodoh.